Alaikum. Let me begin. In the most holy name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the all-wise, true, and living God, who has intervened in the affairs of humanity by coming just as the scriptures predict that God would come, as a human being on this earth. And we are those who recognize God's coming. But he didn't just come, but the scripture also gives us clear indicators as what he would do upon his coming. One of those things is that he would raise someone who would be his voice, who would ultimately grow into that messianic figure that the world of religion has been awaiting. That man that I speak of is the most misunderstood, one of the most heavily overlooked men on this earth, and that is the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. But it's no surprise that white America and white Western world would try to do all in their power to suppress the message and voice of this magnificent man. So we're thankful to Almighty God for continuing his love and continuing his mercy and wisdom by raising up the top student of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad for our benefit. And that man I speak of is none other than the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. With that being said, dear brothers and sisters, let me greet you once again with the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. I hope and pray that each and every one of you are doing well and in good spirits, as we have some important words that we'd like to share with you today. Before I get into our topic, I certainly want to thank all of those who came before us. Brother Rodney, as always, for always handling the rostrum and just the ministry. Absolutely. Always. And of course, my dear sisters, Sister Tequila, who I don't know why you would act like you nervous as much as you talk, and not just talk, but with the wonderful words that she shares via social media, camera, or otherwise. And of course, my sister, Sister Donna, for those very forthright, critical words dealing with the beat. You know, I know I like that subject. And let's give it up for Sister Tequila and Sister Donna. Thank you so much. And again, it only gives proof that the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, that God is using him to raise up so many of our people who are servants for our people. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't show appreciation and gratitude for the brother who has really groomed me and nurtured me in the ministry and in the nation, and that is the Mid-South representative of the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, our brother, Minister Anthony Muhammad, who happens to be out of town during this time. And I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to share what I believe are important words regarding this topic: fear of the solutions, our unity, and our power. I think we've heard a lot lately, especially in this political year, where everybody, particularly among Black America, are arguing and debating over solutions and what's good for our people. But one of the things that severely displeases me is the fact that many of our leaders often tend to overlook the clear, proven solutions that have already been before us for so long. Sometimes, and far too often, we often neglect the good that the Nation of Islam has brought and the proven abilities of how God has used the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and we just totally dismiss that sometimes. Yet we want to adapt to what they call traditional methods, which have taken us nowhere. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Nowhere. So as we approach the 24th anniversary of the Million Man March, what better way to start than to point out this critical aspect of history that literally gave us a glimpse of heaven on earth, a glimpse of the solutions in the most practical terms. Yet this event, this demonstration that took place October 16th, 1995, with the Honorable Minister Farrakhan at its helm, is deliberately overlooked, almost to the point where they try to wipe it out of history. As an educator in the public school systems, I have noticed for several years now, even as a college student, that the Million Man March and its significance is not even mentioned in the history books. No mention of it. Something that is unprecedented, the likes of which has never taken place in the annals of history, but because it was organized by the Nation of Islam and led by the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, whom white folk don't like, because of that reason alone, you find the need to wipe it out of history. Well, I think it's important for us to go through the truth of what this march represents and all that goes along with it. I'm going back to the first slide. That was actually, there we go. What I want to do, I want to start by offering words from the Holy Quran to kind of guide and frame our talk today, followed by words from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Allah in the Holy Quran tells us about the mind of the oppressor, using the scenario of Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh. And we're all familiar with that old story, right? Yes, Moses, the children of Israel, Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the slave master and the ruler of the land. Pharaoh and his people had God's people in bondage. Long story short, God raises up Moses and Aaron to tell Pharaoh to let his people go, and therein was a conflict. Yes, but Allah gives us insight into the oppressor's mind in scriptures like these. This is what Pharaoh said. Pharaoh had a fear of the awakening of God's people. And Pharaoh said, "Leave me to slay Moses." So here's the Pharaoh who wants to kill the man of God and let him call upon his Lord. "Surely I fear that he will change your religion, or that he will make mischief to appear in the land." Now, you don't have to be a genius to realize that this is a common mindset of those who are in power. What has the mindset of the white power structure been since we've been here in America? It has always been a fear that these slaves will one day awaken to who they truly are, and awaken to the truth of who the real wicked powers are. Because once these people awaken, then and only then will Pharaoh and the oppressors lose their place. Because when you awake to who you are, you're going to take your rightful place. So that is the big fear. He feared that Moses, though, the man of God, was key, and he pinpointed Moses as the one God would use to awaken the people. He uses the term, "I fear that he is going to change your religion." It's not religion in the traditional sense. He fears that Moses is going to change your, as the Quran in Arabic calls it, your deen, your way of thinking. He's going to awaken you to make the right judgments. And when you do that, Pharaoh's rule is over. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad corroborates what Allah says in the Holy Quran when he gave these powerful words, "And our Savior has arrived." He said it quite simply: the resurrection of the mentally dead black people brings about the anger of those, talking about the white man, who put the black man to mental death. So it's the same thing the Holy Quran says, isn't it? Just using modern language, geopolitical language, if you will. White folks are afraid that you're going to wake up. And in order to keep you asleep, to keep you in this dead-like state, it is imperative to them that they silence the voice that is doing the awakening. Yes, sir. And you can't even argue with me if you try to deny the fact that that primary voice doing the awakening today is the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. There ain't even no debate on that. And it's interesting, especially in this day and time when everybody's claiming to be woke, you know. How the heck you going to be woke and you don't recognize the man that's waking the people up? So we want to deal with the Million Man March, which has literally been wiped out of the history books. And there's no way we can deal with this historical event without dealing with the man responsible for it. That's like saying you're going to talk about Christianity without talking about Jesus. You're going to talk about the story of Moses and the children of Israel, but we're going to discard Moses. What the? Yeah. So many of our leaders, guided by the enemy, often neglect the prowess and unprecedented historical evidence in our midst. A man the likes of which nobody in history has been able to do what he is still doing. And then how can we not include him in any and damn near every discussion about black solutions? This amazes me. So if we're going to talk about the Million Man March, if we're going to talk about solutions of black America, we have to look at the man who's done the unprecedented things throughout history. The man who called the Million Man March, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Now, part of what I want to do, I kind of want to give a quick walk through history, if you will. Many of us in this room were actually there during the Million Man March. We know the work that was put in. We know the behind the scenes that was going on, but the masses of our people have no clue, especially many of the young people. So we want to take a quick walk and stroll through the history of this thing, starting with some of the background and then leading up to the march on forward. Well, dealing with the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, it's very important to note who he is, not just in how God sees him, but even how the enemy sees him. Yes, sir. I think you've heard that term before, that you can measure the weight of a man not by who his friends are, but by what? By his enemies. Because the greater the enemy, it shows you the greater the value of that man or woman. We have all these different fights coming up. You had Pacquiao fought not too long ago. You got Porter and Spence coming up. And the thing is, none of these fights would have any credibility had they not had great opponents to begin with. How can you tell the value of the fighter? Who he's been up against. You say, oh, he knocked out this one. He fought Kell Brooks. Oh, okay, well, he the real deal. Well, what if the most powerful government, the most powerful forces on earth, the most powerful wicked forces on earth are in opposition and see an unarmed black man as their primary threat? What does that tell you about that black man? And what is it about him that would make it foolish for us to overlook? Now, here's a man who's been targeted by the FBI, by the government, since the 1950s. Most of us weren't even born then. And here's a man who's been not only been targeted by the most powerful government, but has withstood everything that they've come with. So we just gonna overlook that? What? Of course, He's been perhaps the most castigated in the media. Those who control the media look at him as a #1 threat, and for decades they've mislabeled him the leading anti-Semite in America, and an anti-Semite, and he's a bigot, and none of which is true, none of which they can even kind of prove, you know, but they continue that for decades. He was censored by the most powerful legislative body on this earth, the U.S. Senate, in the mid-'80s. The all-white U.S. Senate voted 95-0 to officially censor Minister Farrakhan. Do you know what that means? That an official condemnation means that we don't want anybody to listen to what he has to say. So this will start giving you, you know, some clues as to who you might want to look and listen to. The U.S. and European governments banned him from entering the United Kingdom in the mid-'80s with no justifiable reason. They said that they felt that he would do harm to the public good. Wow. A man who has no history of violence, who has a better history of cleaning up black people than the entire U.S. government. No, everything I'm saying can be qualified and proven now. So don't think we're just popping off with some rhetoric. But this one unarmed man has done more to clean up, restore, improve the lives of black people than the highly resourceful U.S. government and its allied forces throughout the world. But we want to ignore? Come on. So I'm giving all that little bit of background just to show we might want to listen to what a brother like that got to say, right? Now this is before the march now. Back in the 80s, the followers of the Honorable Minister Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam caught national and worldwide attention during the height of the crack epidemic for going into some of the worst crime-ridden, drug-infested housing projects up and down the East Coast and literally cleaning them up. Yes, to the point where it caught national attention. The unarmed brothers of the FOI did what the highly armed, highly resourceful, highly paid police departments could not do. But, I mean, this is proven history, but the interesting part is that the main opposers to this divine work happened to be the U.S. government, some of the police departments, led by Jewish organizations and leaders. The ADL, the JDL, congresspersons, Peter King and the likes of them, the U.S. government. So it's very clear, like Pharaoh, that the U.S. government, the white power structure, does not have your and my best interest in mind. It's very clear now. I don't think I have to convince you of that, right? Not only that, but to continue this divine work in the early 90s, looking at the black-on-black crime that was escalating as a result of the crack epidemic, the government-sponsored crack epidemic, mind you. Looking at the killing on both the East Coast and West Coast, Minister Farrakhan led a few years long nationwide Stop the Killing tour, addressing the core of the issue, bringing love and peace to warring factions among our community. Unprecedented. And of course he was attacked for that. They call that anti-Semitic. Wow. They call that bigoted. Because remember, I fear, Pharaoh's fear, he's gonna change the way you think. I need you to be my slave. And I can't have this troublemaker over here causing mischief in the land, waking my niggers up. So now we're getting closer to the march. Minister Farrakhan held men's only meetings. And it was at that time right here in Memphis that September 19th, 1994, that I was blessed to see that man in person for myself. And you cannot tell me that man didn't have a halo glowing over his head now. You know, he gave a men's meeting, only meeting, because when you look at it, all these black men were being highly misportrayed in the media. But it was also around this time in '93 that was leading up to the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington, you know, led by Dr. King in '63. So many of the African American leaders were getting together to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington. And as it would only be fitting to do so, they invited Minister Farrakhan. Yes, sir. Duh, makes sense, right? Right, sir. However, there were some problems with black leaders inviting their brother, Minister Farrakhan, to address black issues. Wow. Because white powers, particularly the white Jewish leaders who controlled black leaders and organizations, said that you can't do that. Literally. Rabbi David Saperstein, and along with other Jewish leaders, threatened those traditional African American leaders, civil rights leaders, threatened them that they better disinvite Minister Farrakhan, otherwise they would withhold all of the funds and everything so that this 30th anniversary of that march could take place. Needless to say, the Negro leaders, the African American leaders complied with their Jewish master. And you can tell some of them didn't want to. And it was funny because the memo that the rabbi sent those Negro leaders got leaked to the public. And I remember it was around this time when I had to sneak final calls into my house because, you know, I was a teenager. I lived in a Christian evangelical household, and you had parents that ain't trying to have all that Muslim stuff in my house. Amen. So I was sneaking final calls in, and I remember one final call talking about this, and I think the caption was, "Are black leaders and organizations really ours?" Because events like these highlighted the enormous control that white, specifically Jewish leaders and organizations have over black organizations and leaders, to the point that they control these marches. They control so-called black movements. And so they disinvited Minister Farrakhan. And many black people were upset because black people in America were like, oh, whoa, that ain't right. No, sir. How you gonna disinvite the man that's doing more than all y'all put together? You see, from addressing what's supposed to be about freedom, justice, and equality. Get out of here with that. So Minister Farrakhan, you know, went about his way doing what the God put on his heart to do. And he started holding these meetings, men-only meetings, knowing that the image of the black community was horrendous around the world, and the image of black men in particular was that of a bestial, maniacal, and savage type of person. They had all those movies out at the time, Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, South Central, that book, I think Monster, you know, everything portraying black men as these just savage beasts who deserve to be killed. Portraying black men as the problem of America. You already put crack in our community, and then now you exacerbating the tensions by painting these images all before the world. So Minister Farrakhan continued doing what he had been doing anyway. This time he was speaking to black men in particular because he knew that there was a plan and a plot afoot to destroy black men who were being incarcerated like now at unprecedented numbers, who were being taken from the homes, who were becoming deadbeat dads. So being a solutions man, Minister Farrakhan is addressing the issues with solutions. But guess what? He was opposed by the Jewish leaders, by the government. And there were some that actually sued the Nation of Islam and tried to sue Minister Farrakhan for holding all men's meetings, saying that was sexist. Now, the Nation of Islam has been holding all men's meetings and all women's meetings since our inception. You hear me? But you see how the enemy wants to throw caveats. It's just like in the scriptures when Jesus was speaking to the multitudes, and he was doing things and he was healing and performing these miracles that the other leaders couldn't do. And so the Jewish leaders in Jesus' time did the same thing. Now they started plotting on Jesus, trying to throw caveats and stuff in there. Well, you ain't supposed to be healing. You healing on the Sabbath and all that dumb stuff. You know what I mean? And as we were moving closer and closer to the march, you know, Minister Farrakhan speaking all over the country, black men becoming electrified, black men becoming unified, black men becoming motivated and inspired to do what's right. And it was in New York toward the beginning of those men's meetings that Minister Farrakhan uttered the words. He talked about, I want to bring 1 million men, black men, to Washington, D.C. He said that the words just went out of his mouth and he couldn't catch it. He didn't know where it came from. But needless to say, it had to be the Lord, because we know what resulted as a result, right? All praise is due to Allah. So now, as this thing is picking up momentum, Minister Farrakhan is crisscrossing the country speaking. Now, he's starting to do interviews because white folk realized this thing was catching on. Right. And when white folks see something is catching on, they always want to do something to interfere. So just like the scribes during Jesus's day would try to trick Jesus up in arguments and debates, Jesus would always just whoop them with wisdom. Right. You know, with wisdom. And don't you know, they put every kind of journalist, the best journalist that they had, in front of the minister, hoping to trip him up on stuff. And the minister just so kindly, with wisdom, just spanked all of them. All of that journalists, Barbara Walters, Cokie Roberts, who just passed away recently, Sam Donaldson, Peter Jennings, Tim Russert, Phil Donahue, you name it. Everybody they put in front of the minister, he whooped them. And I recall about a week before the march, the minister was on that show this week, on Sunday morning this week, where it was 3 hosts. It was like they tried to put 3 of their best journalists on the minister. I think it was Peter Jennings, Sam Donaldson, Cokie Roberts. All of them were talking to the minister, and they were trying to trip him up. Minister Farrakhan, you say that the government has actually been doing things against black people. Can you recall a time when the government has done something against black people? And the minister started going in. Well, if you look at the counterintelligence program under J. Edgar Hoover, the government has done just this. And as soon as he started answering, whoa, you try to change the subject, you know what I mean? Minister was just whooping all of them back and forth. And now the people seeing this, and it's like, whoa, this is building up more momentum to the march. And I'm going to tell you, those of us working and living during that time, we put some work in. Nobody put more work in than Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. I remember we were going door to door. We had, at that time, the newspaper was bi-weekly, and it was only $1. But we had a special $2 edition to raise money for the Million Man March, and we was going around. We put some work in. But things started to culminate. Allah made things happen beyond what we could do. So there were just different conditions being set in the world and in the nation that we had nothing to do with, but it just kind of helped the cause. One, the OJ trial was going on. The trial of the century. The trial of the century. It had been going on for about a year almost. And now they're nearing the verdict. And then why is it that this trial, which was looked at by everybody on TV, now all of a sudden, Johnny Cochran, everybody, y'all remember Johnny Cochran, flanking Johnny Cochran was the clean-cut brothers of the FOI escorting Johnny Cochran into the courtroom. All of this is on camera. Now the world sees, whoa, whoa. And boy, it must have ticked white folk off. And I remember they were talking about it. They were getting on Johnny Cochran just for having the Muslim brothers secure him. Then, maybe a week or two before the Million Man March, the verdict came down, the OJ trial verdict. And as you know, that left the nation, the country, racially polarized. But you know, Allah has a way of letting things work, you know, in the favor. We ain't had nothing to do with that, you know, but things took place. And I think they were even talking about it. I think I heard some comedians talking about it. Paul Mooney at the time, I remember him talking about the trial and the minister, you know, making a joke, and it was kind of funny. It was like, oh, you know, O.J. Simpson, I don't believe he killed that woman, you know. Y'all know how Paul Mooney is, you know. O.J. Simpson didn't kill that woman. He loved them white people. He loved white women. But if you told me Farrakhan did it, that'd be a different story, you know what I mean? You know? I'm like, okay, but little things like that were still putting it on the conscience. And lo and behold, it was that majestic day, October 16th, 1995, a day unlike any other day in history, when well over 1 million black men converged on the National Mall at the call of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for what became known as the Day of Atonement. Never seen anything like that on this planet. Especially when you're talking about the fact that whenever black folks got together, it seemed like something crazy would always happen. Be mindful, this is when like Freaknik and stuff was still going on every year. You know, all those summer, hey, it was crazy. But over 1 million black men, look y'all, not one fight, not one argument, not one altercation, with over 1 million black men of different ideologies. All your gangs were represented there. Your Crip, your Blood, your GD, your VL, all the other ones, they were at the march. Not one incident. Unprecedented. And then it was over 1 million. The largest, most peaceful demonstration of black unity in the history of the world, but it's not even talked about in your history books. Now, think about it, just in schools alone. You have fights and all of this taking place every day. Sometimes the school ain't got but 200 people. Fights, major altercations, you got to have metal detectors. But here's a man at one man's call, not an argument. People, that was a glimpse of heaven on earth. Unprecedented. According to the Trotter Review, it says, this day witnessed the largest mass political demonstration in the history of this nation. The assemblage of more than 1.2 million African American men in Washington, D.C. under the banner of the Million Man March. Now this was so powerful that even that morning, when we were there that morning, many of us was there at 5 in the morning. Even at 5 in the morning, it was already at least 250,000 people there at 5 in the morning. And as the day progressed, just a sea, as far as you can see, just a sea of black men. Look, it was so powerful that President Clinton, who was president at the time, ran the president out of town. Yes, sir. They learned that all these black men was coming, and when they realized that, oh, this thing is going to happen, everything shut down. Now be mindful, this took place on a Monday. Yes, sir. On a Monday, a business day. And it's funny because early on, the Negro leaders, the African American leaders were not with the minister. He shared it, the platform with them, wanting their input, advice, but they felt like if he was talking about marching, he needs to come to us. We know about marching. We've been marching for civil rights and all of that. But see, they didn't understand the type of march the minister was talking about. He's not talking about the march they were used to. See, when they talk about marching, they're talking about having white folks approve, support, finance their movement in a way that don't do anything to really threaten the power structure of white supremacy. So yes, they are used to marching in that regard. But the minister has a whole different thing in mind. He's making an organized demonstration before the world, showing that the God of this black man is still alive and present. So the black leaders, for the most part, the traditional ones, they were not with the minister. Many opposed him publicly until the last hour. About maybe a week, within that week of the march, when they saw that, man, ain't no stopping this thing is going to happen. Then they came. Then they came. And I remember, and the minister, being the gracious man that he is, he gave all of them a platform to speak. He gave all of them a platform to speak, even if they weren't talking about nothing. And some of them must not have been talking about nothing, because any brother that was there, remember, at a certain point, the brothers were getting tired and were saying, look, we want Farrakhan, Farrakhan, Farrakhan. That's what was being yelled out on the march. They were getting tired of the same old, keep hope alive. You know, all that, you know, not to be funny, but it was like, it was kind of trite, you know. You dealing with these warrior men out here, and you telling them, you know, this same old passive traditional stuff that never did work in the first damn place. So the brothers were like, look, Farrakhan, Farrakhan. And when the minister came, everything shut down. Everything. Now look, don't talk about black power and you don't bring this up. The minister ran the president, the leader of the free world. He ran him out of town. Clinton got on down, went down to Austin, Texas, giving a speech. He was trying to throw some shade. You know, he didn't mention the minister by name, but he was trying to throw some shade, talking about race relations and stuff like that. Minister, get your... Congress shut down on a Monday. The Negro leaders felt like the minister should have had it on the weekend. On a Saturday, that's when they had their marches. Ministers said, no. Most of the time, the weekend, Fridays and Saturdays, is filled with that spirit of frivolity. This ain't no joke. We ain't coming here to play. We ain't coming here to party. We do it on a work day, and all these brothers gonna pay their own way. That's responsibility. That's manhood right there. See? The Negro leaders weren't used to that, because white folks pay for everything. That's why whenever they have marches, you'll see somewhere on the banner, sponsored by Budweiser, the king of beers. This scholarship promoted by the Ford Motor Company. This Black History fact by Mickey D's McDonald's. We done gave over 1 million black men heart attacks, but you gonna support the black movement. I mean, come on. They used to that, but hell no, this was the first and only time that our event, especially of this magnitude, was totally independent. Yes, sir. Totally. So the world witnessed civilized black men, which totally contradicted what Hollywood had been portraying. Yes, sir. Don't you know that all your government shut down except the military? The National Guard was on standby in DC because they were preparing for something to go down so that they could be justified in trying to slaughter these black men. Yes, sir. But they don't know the God of Farrakhan. They don't know the God of the Nation of Islam, who put a spirit of tranquility over these black men. Discipline and order, the likes of which has never been seen before. So with all of that taking place, the world ended up seeing the black man do what nobody has ever done. The world saw this. And look what, all of this love, this discipline, this peace, this order, this unity was all done by a man that they call an anti-Semite and a bigot and a, sexist, misogynist. He did all of this. What did he have black men do? Remember, this march was about atonement. Black men, he was getting us to accept the responsibility that we have failed at being what we could be. We have failed at being the fathers, the husbands, the brothers, the leaders of our community. We failed, so we're coming to acknowledge our shortcomings, but at the same time, we're going to do something about it. So we made a pledge before the world. Minister Farrakhan had all these millions of black men who were there and listening say this pledge before the world now. Says, I pledge that from this day forward, I will strive to love my brother as I love myself. I, from this day forward, will strive to improve myself spiritually, morally, mentally, socially, politically, and economically for the benefit of myself, my family, and my people. That's anti-Semitic, right? No, that's anti-Semitic. You can't be loving yourself around here. We need you niggas to kill each other. Talking about some black love and I'm not going to kill my brother. We can't have that. Don't you think we need love in our community? Yes, sir. Don't you think it's too much self-hate already rampant in our community? Yes, so Minister Farrakhan is addressing it and having millions of black men to promise to do something about it, but that's not, he's anti-Semitic for that. He continues, I pledge that I will strive to build business, build houses, build hospitals, build factories, and enter into international trade for the good of myself, my family, and my people. With the economic plight that's plaguing the black community, don't we need some type of cooperative economics taking place? Yes, sir. Don't we need, in truth, economic independence? But don't you know, hell, don't we even just need to at least buy black? But something as positive and needed as this is, and this is no joke, Jewish leaders do call that anti-Semitic. Yes, sir. And they have documented it. Leaders of the ADL, now this is from the 60s, but it's the same principle, it's the same practice, practiced by the Jewish leaders and organizations to this day. This was by the ADL leader at that time, who literally said that Negroes who urged buy black campaigns, that is anti-Semitic. So everything the minister was doing about encouraging black people to buy your own and build, enter into international trade and commerce and do for self, that goes against their objectives. So we cannot let you listen to a man that's trying to heal you. He continues. Well, we continued, because remember, millions of black men gave this pledge before the world. I pledge that from this day forward, I will never raise my hand with a knife or a gun to beat, cut, or shoot any member of my family or any human being except in self-defense. I pledge from this day forward, I will never abuse my wife by striking her, disrespecting her, for she is the mother of my children and the producer of my future. I pledge that from this day forward, I will never engage in the abuse of children, little boys or little girls, for sexual gratification. For I will let them grow in peace to be strong men and women for the future of our people. Now, God damn it, what's taking place in our community? All the damn rape and molestation and abuse that's taking place. Damn it, we need every bit of this today. Hold up. What are these white toxic feminists when it comes to this? Because these are the same ones that call the minister sexist and call the march sexist and misogynist. Because Minister Farrakhan urged black men to take responsibilities for our people and our women. So they some damn hypocrites. Anybody who would be against this is an enemy to black people. Clearly. All the rape and molestation, you know, and we know who's behind it. And I'm not talking about the individuals that we point to, the R. Kellys and whatnot. I'm talking about the ones behind the systems, behind the rape culture. And we're the ones that's pointing them out more so than anybody. So don't talk about freedom, justice, and equality. Don't you talk about women's rights and you don't come talk to the man that's doing more for women's rights than any of these so-called toxic feminists. I hope I made somebody mad. If I ain't making somebody mad, I ain't doing my job. That's right. Come on now. We continue. This is part of the pledge. I will never use the B word to describe any female, but particularly my own black sister. I pledge from this day forward that I will not poison my body with drugs or that which is destructive to my health and my well-being. Now, this goes against everything that the white producers of movies and music has for our people. They profit from our ignorance. You cannot get a record deal unless you're talking about doing drugs and abusing women. So everything the march stands for, all of the values of the march slide directly in the face of the white power structure and their plans against our people. Yes, let me take you right back to Pharaoh in the beginning now. I fear that this man of God is going to change the thinking. He's going to change the religion of the people. Because when he does that, they can no longer be my slaves. This man is waking us up. And we continue. I pledge from this day forward, I will support black newspapers, black radio, black television. I will support black artists who clean up their acts to show respect for themselves and respect for their people and respect for the ears of the human family. I will do all of this, so help me God. Now, don't you think we need our own independent black media? Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to rely on white folks to tell our history, and they're going to be truthful with it, right? Yeah. We're going to let Lifetime do a story about me. Going to be played by a white man, right? Yes, and I say that the white man is the devil. Yeah, I mean, come on, really? But it's important because we see the ramifications. Now, all of your major media networks, your major social media networks, they are disallowing any criticism of their power structure. You can't even criticize Israel. You get taken off the air, banned from social media, but we're going to let the enemy narrate our history and our cause. So everything about the Million Man March was nothing but good. But you know what? White folk gonna be white folks. Because right after the march, I mean, really was within 24 hours, they came out. Now remember, the whole world saw this sea of well over 1 million black men. Now this is from the Trotter Review, not us. They said that within 24 hours after the conclusion of the march, the issue of the actual number of persons in attendance surfaced as a matter of major controversy. Initially, the National Park Service provided an official estimate of 400,000. After leaders of the march complained about an undercount, the official estimate was raised to about 850,000. The Million Man March Organizing Committee held to an estimate of well over 1 million. For those of us in attendance, because the man who was over this report actually was an observer at the march. He says, for those of us in attendance, there was no doubt that the goal of 1 million was easily surpassed. Right. So it wasn't even the next day. White folks were straight up lying. all the media. I remember getting off the bus. We hadn't even made it back to Memphis yet. It was the morning, almost dawn, and we made a stop, and I'm looking at the newspapers. We picked up the newspaper, and the top it said 400,000 gathered. Everybody was like, oh, man. And that was a running thing going on. Y'all remember the movie in the early 90s, White Men Can't Jump? Yeah. They had a saying that white men can't count either, you know? And then they were talking like, how the hell you gonna say it was 400,000? Maybe they counted us as 3/5 of a human being. Maybe that's what it was, you know? Because they still looked at us, you know. But the National Park Service, who made that erroneous estimate, they got caught in their lies. They got caught in their lies, and they were so embarrassed that they gave a report, and it was in the New York Times, where they said that the head of the Park Service said today that his agency's official count of 400,000 was somewhat low. You know, it's just a few bit off. They got caught. So the whole world saw these well over 1 million men, and they're going to come out with their official reports. It was 400,000. Yes, sir. Knowing you hating. But you know what? That literally changed the numbers game. The Million Man March changed that forever. Up until that time, the National Park Service had always kept a record and tally of the numbers. But since they were so embarrassed for lying, you know, before the world, it became known that they stopped doing it after the Million Man March. For decades, the National Park Service provided official crowd estimates for gatherings on the National Mall, but no longer does. The policy changed after the Million Man March in 1995, a gathering of black men meant to show renewed commitment to family and solidarity. Thank you. So it literally changed the numbers game. That's why this issue came up again in recent history. If you remember during Donald Trump's inauguration, it was a dismal crowd out there, and Trump was, you know, making, and his, it was like this many out there, you know, and he was saying some stuff. It was the largest crowd we've ever seen, you know. One of the first major lies he told when he was in office, one of the first of these 60,000 lies that he's told, you know. And this issue came up again. But while we're taking this quick walkthrough of history, I want to show you what some of this thing meant to the world, its significance. And this is not from me, this is from the Trotter Report. It showed the world that in 1995, black men would not allow white America to choose and sanction its leaders. For the first time, because traditionally our approved leaders have always been some black, normally Christian, traditional civil rights type of, you know, people that white folk didn't mind us listening to for the most part, unless they got out of line, and then they'll kill them like Dr. King, you know. But for the first time, here you have a Muslim, and the only of those leaders outside of that mainstream traditional guard who don't follow white folks' approval and rules in that sense, you know what I mean? So it was clear that this is the premier leader of black people, and white folk ain't have nothing to do with it. Black folks recognize that. I think I read somewhere where the sheep know the call of their shepherd, right? Yes, sir. That black people had sufficient leadership skill and logistical capability to pull off a march of unprecedented size and complexity. See, this proved that the black man can do anything. We don't need white folks for nothing. We didn't need white folks to come in and organize anything for us. We didn't need white folks to sit down and plan stuff out as they have traditionally done with all of our other marches and organizations. They direct our movements. But here, we did it. Black men, organizations, black people played an integral part in this. And by us working together, we did everything and did it better than white folks had ever done for themselves. All the logistics, the planes, the buses, the cars, we got that together. It proves that millions of black men are politically conscious and politically astute. They would try to make it seem like all those black men, you just came out there to hear some maniacal anti-Semite rant about some racist rhetoric, you know what I mean? It's very insulting to our intelligence, too. In fact, they try to make it seem like the reason you are here now, you just came out to hear some racist rhetoric. You know, you just so mad at the world. You don't have anything better to do. So they speak to your pain and your hurt. You know, but it's proved that black people are politically astute. You know what's going on. And it certainly proved that all black men aren't thugs and hoodlums that the media has portrayed them to be. It also proved that black people are capable of financing our own liberation. As I mentioned earlier, this was the first time that black people, and this was the largest gathering of that magnitude with no help from white folks. We can do everything we need. This is why knowing about the march is so important, because if you wipe this out of the people's mind, out of history, black folks will have no idea that we can actually do stuff, y'all. That's why this is important. Praise is due to Allah. That's why it's so necessary that this is constantly highlighted. So I do like that theme that they would have when they would say, long live the spirit of the Million Man March. Long live all these principles, all these values that prove that we don't need white folks. And that's black folks' biggest fear. We believe we want something good for our people, but deep down in our heart and mind, we don't believe that we can do it without white folks. We think we have to go through traditional frameworks for everything. But see, remember, God's man comes to get you out of that mindset. That's why he comes to change your religion. And that's why Pharaoh fears that. Because when your mind is awakened and open, you realize, golly, all this time I've been thinking that I need, you know, kind of like the scarecrow in The Wiz, you know. All this time he thought that he had to be up there. He didn't even know he could walk on his own. Y'all remember The Wiz with Michael Jackson? You can't win. Oh, yeah. Another story for another time. But it proved that special bonds of fellowship existed between black men across class and ideological lines. This was the unifying factor. Minister Farrakhan and the nation was able to pull the most unifying factor of all of our people in unprecedented ways. Remember, you had Christians, Muslims, Hebrews, atheists, agnostics, vice lord, gangster disciples, Crips, Bloods, Republicans, Democrats. Every spectrum of black America was represented at the Million Man March. And it was in peace. So this proved so much for us. Now, what would happen if our young people knew the history of this? So many of our young people, I'm telling you, they don't even believe that, you know, oh man, I can't even go talk to no blood and stuff, man. They're gonna try to get me, man. They don't even think it's possible. So this is where the Nation of Islam comes in, and where the nation, practically speaking, has been most effective. It proved that black people are not prepared to accept the consequences to the Republican Revolution or the Democratic Party's abandonment to social justice without a militant response. These are just a few things. It also proved that the unarmed fruit of Islam, the FOI, exemplified that black America can protect and secure its own communities. I remember at the last commemoration, 10-10-15, the 20th commemoration of the Million Man March, which was dynamic, didn't get no press, by the way. And this time, white folk kind of learned a lesson. They had all kind of police there, as if something was going to go down. And I remember being there, my FOI uniform, and there was a white police officer on job, you know, in a very respectful tone. How you doing, sir? So you know what, you got the easiest job of anybody out here, don't you? He didn't have to do nothing. He saw me with my FOI uniform right here. I was basically letting him know, we got this, you know. Just come to the side. You just on the clock getting paid. I want to say, look, just look and be amazed, you know? But look at the effects of the march. And this, again, wiped out of history. Part of what was suggested was that black men and families, that the black family is strengthened. And there was a huge number of adoptions that took place, to the point that after the Million Man March, even CNN saw the need to highlight this reality. Think of all the black children who are orphans and left abandoned for different reasons, parents strung out and whatnot. Well, these children need care, man. They need families. So listening to Farrakhan's voice, man, black men and women and families, the adoption rate of black children increased dramatically per the call of Minister Farrakhan. And it's something that's still needed in this day and time, because now it's become a novelty for white, particularly white gay couples, to adopt black children. They're like, okay, if you niggas want, we will. And they'll make it like it's a novelty, literally. You know, and technically that's damn near like slavery, isn't it? You proving it, you showing the world the niggas that you got. Yeah, I got about 3 in my stock. But its effect, it mobilized black men for community involvement. The minister gave the call for black men to go join positive organizations and be involved in your communities. So all of your stuff, the NAACP, all of these organizations got filled. Black men that started joining at the call of Minister Farrakhan. Even black churches, Minister Farrakhan directed black men to go join churches. And some of these black churches that benefited from Minister Farrakhan's call wanted to talk about them, but another something. It contributed to an increase in black voters. The number of black voters increased significantly. He didn't tell anybody who to vote for. He just said, register to vote. And as a result of him, and what that showed white folk is that, man, these Muslims got some political power that they don't even use. You see what I mean? I heard that boy Dershowitz. I heard him say, he was talking about the minister. And if you don't know, Dershowitz is supposed to be one of these leading attorneys, also a child molester, but that's another issue. But he was talking about the minister, calling him an anti-Semite, and he expressed a concern that was not only his, but a concern of white leaders. He was saying, you know, we can't let people listen to this man because he could affect the voting, you know, turnouts in these different cities. Like, oh, that's why. Oh, see? White folk don't think like us in all categories. But it's some power there that I'm not going to say we don't use because we can't use it. The nation, we just wise in how we use it. If we want somebody in office, we'll put them in. It sparked an increase in black adoptions. It showed that brothers could rally peacefully under a common cause, and it created spinoffs. This was according to the Root.com, talking about the effects of the Million Man March. What do you mean by spinoffs? It inspired other movements. It inspired other million man, million woman this. We had the Million Family March in 2000, over 1 million people again. This time it had families. We had the Millions More movement in 2005, over 1 million again. You don't even hear nothing about none of these, do you? You had black leaders and organizations form coalitions. Then you had 10-10-15, just 4 years ago. Didn't have no media personnel. Had a lot of young people there too. Everything was done via social media, and they learned the power of Minister Farrakhan and the nation via social media. So a lot of changes came after 10-10-15. But during 10-10-15, Minister Farrakhan was working with some young sisters. One of them name was Tamika Mallory out of New York, who said that when she was a little girl, her parents used to take her to the mosque and to the church, you know, because they loved Minister Farrakhan and loved what the nation was doing. Ran into some other young ladies, some activists, Carmen Perez, Linda Sarsour, all of whom shared words on the platform of the 10-10-15, the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March. These are young ladies that Minister Farrakhan supported and encouraged to stand up and fight, and he gave them a platform and a voice to express and stand up for women's rights and to stand up for justice. It was these three that ultimately got together and were inspired and encouraged by Minister Farrakhan to start what now became known as the Women's March. You didn't know that Farrakhan was behind that too? Oh, that's because white folks started to hijack it, didn't they? White women, particularly them toxic white feminists, they started to hijack it. And they said that Tamika Mallory and all these other crackers, I'm sorry, they're just crackers, man, started inserting themselves into the movement, saying that, you know what, you gotta condemn Farrakhan, he's a misogynist, when he's the one that gave them the strength to stand up in the first place, you know what I mean? So that's why I thank people like Sister Tamika Mallory for not being like these weak-kneed Negro men who don't have the gall, I said gall, to stand up for truth. So I'm proud of our sister, and we encourage her to keep on standing up for freedom, justice, and equality. But you know what? As a result of the Million Man March, there was a significant national drop in crime. But politicians tried to take credit for it. I don't know if this is going to play. This is Method Man on the Breakfast Club. Let me see. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you can't hear it. But basically, they were Charlemagne the God and Method Man were talking about parts of New York where some of them grew up and how much crime and everything it was. And they were talking about how in around 95, 96, there was a huge reduction in crime in that part of New York. And Charlemagne had mentioned, did Mayor Giuliani have something to do with that? And Method Man kept it real. He was like, oh, he wanted to take credit for it, but no, that was the result of the Million Man March. You know, that was the Million Man March right there. And Meth kept it 100. He said he even gave reasons. Why? He said because, you know, after the march, man, what the minister was saying to us, man, you know, it did something to us, man, and we started to reflect on that. So yeah, that was the minister right there. That was. And Charlemagne had to bear witness. Oh yeah, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, yeah, you know. But politicians nationwide tried to take credit for the reduction in crime that had taken place after the march. The Clinton administration tried to take credit, you know. But everybody know what the deal was. Everybody okay? Yes, sir. All right, I think we're making good time. So the enemy came on with their slander. They tried to find anything, just like they did with Jesus. Jesus was performing these miracles, and the miracles ain't nothing but good, but the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they were trying to find anything to try to twist all the good work that Jesus was doing. Even though he was performing miracles and casting out demons, like the minister, the Jewish leaders tried to say, well, he's doing these things by the ruler of the demons. He's doing these things by the power of Beelzebub. You see? It's like, in other words, he's an evil leader. He's tricking them into getting off drugs. You know, they can't even get their lie straight. So now, because it was labeled a Million Man March, they tried to say that this thing was sexist. By they, I'm talking about white folks, the toxic white feminists that were there. They tried to say that the march was sexist, and they would always be trying to compare the great March on Washington in '63 with Dr. King, I Have a Dream speech, with the Million Man March, you know, because they love Dr. King, now that he's dead anyway, you know, and because they controlled the March on Washington back then, you know, they feel like that should be the model. And since you didn't do it the way we did it through Dr. King, then, but they tried to call the minister sexist. But, you know, the minister highlighted some history. You know, he has researchers, and based on the march back in '63, they only had 2 women on the platform. And they were not sharing words, they were singing. You had Marian Anderson and Mahalia Jackson. So in other words, it was like we only got 2 women, and y'all just get up there and sing. We don't need to hear what you got to say. Whereas in the Million Man March, not only did women share the platform, but the women, the mothers of the black struggle were there, sharing the platform, sharing words to their sons, their brothers, and their nephews. You had one of our mothers, the late, great Dorothy Height, leader of the Negro Women's Council. She was alive during the March on Washington. Hell, she helped start the Civil Rights Movement. She wasn't on the podium. Hello, somebody. But she was on the podium at the Million Man March. You had Maya Angelou, one of our great, great poets, who shared with her brothers that we shall still rise, and still I rise. You can't say that for the other folks. You had Dr. Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X. You talking all that stuff, you a Malcolmite and all of that, but you ain't have Sister Betty Shabazz on your platform, free to say whatever she needed to say, free to say whatever was on her heart to say. You see? You didn't have Queen Mother Moore, who was at the Million Man March. So it's not even a comparison. See, the way they try to lie, when they lie and try to spin stuff, the hope is that you don't do research to verify it. So when you look at it, why most black people are still, you know, feeling some kind of way about the nation, it's because they hadn't even done the adequate research. So many of our people believe that nonsense. Man, they ain't going down there, they anti-Semitic. You know, they don't even know what it is. Then white folk did what they had to do. They started inciting rumors over the money. Because on the National Mall, we collected money, just like we do at the mosque, just like you do at church. You collect tithes and charity. We collected money. You know, all those brothers held up dollar bills and whatnot like that and put it in the boxes. And so they started the rumors, the enemy. What happened to the money? Where all the money go? And we try to incite stuff. Yeah, I think Minister Farrakhan pimped y'all. Now here's the deal. We don't mind you questioning us. But in all fairness, you ain't never questioned where the money come from or went to at any of those other marches or events in history. And all of it proved that white folks were the ones that funded it and took it. See if you want to talk. But don't you know that the Million Man March was the only demonstration of that magnitude to even publish an independent audit accounting for every penny? Look at that. So the fools who were still incite that what happened to the money, like, man, don't you read? It's been published in several publications, every penny. Not only that, but Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam were the largest damn donors anyway. So half the ones that's even trying to ask the question didn't give nothing in the first place. You know, they're just trying to throw shade. So the nation did the bulk of the expenses and all of that. But the Million Man March was the only independently organized and funded. Now, they can't say that for the March on Washington in '63, since that's what they try to point to. Do y'all recognize any of those faces over there besides JFK and Dr. King? You may recognize some of them, A. Philip Randolph, and what's the other one? That Ralph Bunche, or... But what about those white dudes? Y'all know any of who those are? Those are the organizers of the March on Washington of 1963. You see that young man? Well, not young man, the one in the middle? That's Rabbi Joaquin Prinz, a major organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. And don't you know the Kennedy administration, and you can look this up, it's verifiable, they had jitters before the March on Washington because they were not certain as to what would be said. But when it was organized with these white folks, and it was approved that I'm gonna say this, he gonna say that, blah, 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 then and only then would they allow it to take place, because the Kennedy administration was ready to pull the plug if anybody was to say anything outside of the approved wording. So you may have heard the story that before Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, it had another title. Bounce check marked insufficient funds. Come on, somebody, because Dr. King was talking about how America has pretty much issued black America a bounce check. You giving all these false promises and everything. But that sounded a little bit too, radical. So the white organizers and the Jewish organizers had to play their part. So the Million Man March, who organized it? We did. Black leaders, women and men. Women played an integral part of the march throughout the whole process. Matter of fact, women were the main ones urging the minister to speak to all men. Some of them were tired of their husbands and stuff, like, look, you need to talk to this dude, please. My boys and mothers, go with him. But after the march, a few months after the march, remember, this positive image of what took place went around the entire world. The whole world was in awe over black people, particularly black men, because remember, the whole world thought black men were all these savages. That image had been around the world. The Million Man March saved us from worldwide destruction. So when these leaders from around the world saw the magnitude and majesty of the march, they were so in awe by the minister, because everybody knows the only person capable of doing that was the Honorable Minister Farrakhan. That's like understood. No other leader, white, black, or otherwise, could have done anything like that. But all the hate started taking place from white leaders after the march, that somebody raised the point that if a white man had called a Million Man March and did everything Minister Farrakhan did, he would have been given the Nobel Peace Prize. But the minister, he went on, these leaders from around the world wanted the minister to come and really advise them. Because you saw all these black Christians and Muslims, all these what otherwise would be warring factions and groups coming together in peace. So these countries that have civil wars taking place in their countries, these rulers were like, look, you need to help us with something. How you do that, Farrakhan? So he went on a world friendship tour throughout Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and in doing so, they were just so impressed. And that's a whole story in and of itself. The World Friendship Tour deserves lecturers by themselves. But to make a long story short, these leaders were so impressed with the nation, with the minister, and what he's doing with black people, that they offered to fund the nation and the minister for the purposes of helping black people. Yes, sir. Some Muslim kings and rulers awarded Minister Farrakhan $250,000. Muammar Gaddafi promised the wealth of Libya to help the minister and the nation, help black people. Because remember, Gaddafi in his green book years ago, he wrote that in the end, black people are going to rule. Yes, sir. So here you have a leader of a Muslim African country in Africa talking about what he wants to do for his Muslim brother. And just when these world leaders were willing to give the wealth of their country to the nation to help black people, Congress passed laws immediately saying that no so-called American citizens can accept money or anything from what we call rogue countries. You see? So now look, it's bad enough they won't give us reparations that they owe us, but hell, you want to stop others from helping us too? That should let you know clearly who and what your enemy is. Why aren't the black leaders talking about this? The media and the Congress tried to threaten him, saying that he was going around cavorting with dictators, and then say they were going to subpoena him before Congress. And Minister Farrakhan came back into the States, in the United States, talking that stuff that he was doing, said, look, don't threaten me, telling me you're going to bring me before Congress. God damn it, bring me. Shit, you know? So, hey, that was kind of his expression too. Savings Day 96, I mean, I'm kind of animating it a little bit, but that was the spirit. It's like, look, you going to threaten me? You going to subpoena me before Congress for going to Muslim, African countries? No, don't threaten me. Bring me before Congress. Yeah. Needless to say, they didn't bother with that. They left that alone. But see, their concern is reminiscent of what the scriptures talk about. See, the Jewish leaders, the wicked leaders, were concerned over the people listening to Jesus. They said that if we let him go, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. The whole world gonna start to go after him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. See, the Jewish leaders knew something. While even though they were in what was supposed to be the Roman government, the Jewish leaders were the ones that really was having control and influence in the governmental affairs. And because they felt like if the people were getting woke up by Jesus, then these Romans might even turn against us and we might lose our place. And it's like that with the Jewish leaders. Look at all the Jewish organizations that control the agencies of the U.S. government, the ADL. They control and advise every law enforcement agency in America, according to their own words. Look at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, who control and influence education in America. Look at all of these AIPAC, who control domestic and foreign policies of America. See, so these Jewish groups and organizations are concerned that if the people listen to Farrakhan, even the white Gentiles might take our place. And unfortunately, after the march, due to all the propaganda and due to white and Jewish control over black leaders, many doors shut down. Now, the minister performed this miracle, the likes of which had never been seen before, with the Million Man March. Nothing but a positive thing for black people and the world. But with the influence that they had on religious leaders, churches closed their doors. These televangelists started calling Minister Farrakhan the Antichrist, and that crap started spreading throughout black churches. Even right here in Memphis, many of those black preachers, they had a field day going in on the nation and the minister, talking about all that they don't believe in Jesus. You know, the same rhetoric, foolishness. And a few years later, when Bush got in office, he had a faith-based initiative where religious groups would get funded by the government to help, in restoring social affairs. But it was Jewish leaders on that Bush advising Bush on that initiative. I think it was Goldberg or something like that. And they made it clear that, this is for religious groups to receive these funds, except the Nation of Islam. Yes, sir. They made it clear. We'll let any church or religious group receive funds, except the people that's done more to restore social justice than anybody else. And it was shortly after the march that the media realized, man, we can't say nothing about the minister in public. Every time we try to lie on him, it seems to work in his favor. So ultimately, they came up with the media blackout. They realized that the best way to try to silence his voice is to just don't say nothing about him at all. And that media blackout really heightened after 9/11. You didn't hear nothing. People started thinking the minister was dead because they weren't hearing from him anymore. After the march, the minister was literally banned from black colleges and colleges. because white money controls black colleges. But what's the result? And we're nearing the end, y'all. What's the result of downplaying the Million Man March, the minister, and the values that the Nation of Islam bring to the table and have brought to the table? See? What is the largest? Why is the largest, most peaceful demonstration of black unity not in most history books, educational curriculum, and mainstream media? And what are the results now? See? All that crap we see taking place in our community that the Million Man March and its values aim to counter. When you keep the solutions away, you keep the medicine away, then the people will become more and more sick. Yes, because you have deprived the people of the very solution and medicine that has proven their healing. I'm not going to go into all of this because time is upon us, but needless to say, every aspect of the Million Man March, we need those values today, and everything that the Million Man March, everything the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, everything the Nation of Islam represents is a direct threat to the power structure of white supremacy, yes, more so than any other entity. I'm going to say that again because we have to qualify this. There's a lot of people, a lot of groups doing good, a lot of people, a lot of groups that are threatening white power structure. And we love that and we respect that and we work with that. But none are doing it to the effective degree of the Nation of Islam. That's right. If you look at all of the objectives of the COINTELPRO, the FBI's objectives against us, it all had to do with preventing unity and stopping anyone who could unify black people. And so the minister and the nation is the #1 threat, because who's more effective at unifying black people across ideological lines and any other lines? All right? Oh, it's plain and simple. And think about it. It's a threat to the economic stability of white folks. Just think about if you listen to Farrakhan, you get off drugs, you get off tobacco, you start living a lifestyle. Look at all these industries that's going to go down and die. That's right. And so they said, Minister Louis Farrakhan to this day is the only black American leader, or perhaps any American leader, who possesses the amount of clout to summon that many black people to Washington, D.C., or anywhere else for that matter, knowing that they will come by the hundreds of thousands. I mean, that's pretty clear. Yes, but what's synonymous is that this sounds just like what happened when Jesus came into Jerusalem. Yes, sir. When Jesus came into the seat of power, the people were yelling, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And when the Jewish leaders heard the people, especially the young people, shouting these praises for the Jesus, they became indignant. Yes, sir. They said, no, we got to do something. Because that term, Hosanna, to the Son of David, the Jewish leaders knew what that meant when everybody else didn't know. See, Hosanna to the Son of David, that's a sign that this is the Messiah. See, as we close, and if you all be kind enough to give me 5 more minutes, is that okay? As we close, the Jewish leaders realized they knew the prophecies. And by hearing the young people respond to Jesus the way that they did, they counseled among themselves and said, you know what that means? I'm like, yeah. And even though it shows who the Messiah figure was, it also caused them to want to plot his death even more. So now, the Jewish leaders of America, knowing that Minister Farrakhan has the ear and hearts of our people, especially young people, that's why they had to take him off social media. They banned him from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, many of his YouTube videos. I mean, they going crazy to try to keep young people from listening and gravitating to the man that has their hearts. So now, knowing this, the Jewish leaders have come up with a plan, and they said this recently. The major problem with Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Think about this, y'all. These white American, Jewish, and Israeli leaders say that the number one threat to a foreign country, to Israel now, is not some nuclear weapons, is not even another nation. It's talking about black youth who don't even know where Israel is on a map, y'all. But they see you as the enemy. And what black leader do you even know talking about this? This is what gets to me, y'all. How you going to be for our people, but you scared to deal with the very core entity who are planning the destruction of our people? That's what the Pharaoh said. That's why he wants to slay Moses and the children of Israel, because now they realize that your awakening represents their downfall. So I'm going to close with this last side, that even though Satan plans our destruction, you probably heard in the news, and I wasn't going to go away without talking about it, y'all. Yes, our God plans, and our God is the best of planners. Hello, somebody. Don't make me have to teach a whole nother subject now. All I'm saying is that there is clearly a power with Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam that is far superior to anything in this world, period. And they know that. And I don't know if you've been keeping up in the news or not, but all this talk about UFOs, the wheels that backs Farrakhan, this power of his real God in the real world, now it's evident. So all your military officials are just going crazy. Y'all did see all them videos that was leaked about a year ago, right? You heard about how the Navy pilots are so concerned because they see UFOs on a daily basis, and now they're concerned because they don't feel as though they're reporting it to their superiors is doing any good. So they started coming out. They broke protocol and started coming out. They're like, look, we see this stuff daily. Now the Air Force, at an alarming rate, their pilots are committing suicide. Yes, sir. Unlike never before. Wow. Something's going on, y'all. And now just about a week or two ago, it talked about how the Navy officials confirmed, yes, those videos, that's the real deal, but they wasn't supposed to be leaked to the media. Y'all wasn't supposed to see that. So there are powers even within the highest echelons of government about not just the so-called UFO phenomena, but that is directly tied to the power of the God of Minister Farrakhan, and that's why they hadn't been able to do anything with him. That's why they hadn't been able to do anything with the Nation of Islam. That's why the Nation of Islam has been able to do what nobody else has been able to do, even though we've had the largest opposition of gangsters. That's because of the power of a mighty God. And if you have as much sense as I know you do, you would be running to stand with that man and a God that has that kind of power. So brothers and sisters, thank you all for listening. Thank you for your time. I'm going to get on out of here. Assalamu alaikum.